All right, well, now we're going to transition into maybe the less fun part, but the learning part, and some good stuff this week, too. We're going to do the albums.
Yep.
So, you want to go ahead and introduce what our first album's going to be, and then maybe I'll give a little bit of color, as they say, to the band.
Yeah, we're talking about Cop Shoot Cop and their album Ask a Question, or Ask Questions Later, I should say. And this is a noise rock group, also out of Ohio, I think. Or am I thinking of Afghan Wigs?
You're thinking of Afghan Wigs, yeah. Cop Shoot Cop was out of New York
York
City, and they definitely capture the chaos of New York City at its time. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, based on the name alone, you should know that this kind of is a confrontational sounding band. They were, I would classify them as industrial rock also. And what else do you want to say about kind of their?
Well, the members are Todd A.
Okay.
Toda, vocals and bass guitar. This is the initial group.
Yep.
David, I want to say Ume, Ouimet, keyboards and sampler, and Phil Paleo on drums, and they describe it as metal in parentheses, which is found objects that are just placed in his drum set. So they'd been in a couple of the members of the group had been in Todd and Paleo had been in the Providence, Rhode Island group Dig Dat Hole was the name of it. So they actually were founded in 1987, and this album comes later in 1993. They asked the band. I found this hilarious, Josh. They asked the band what their name was inspired by, and they said their shared dislike of police officers. And they said it's also, which okay, yep, that's pretty much it. And then a newspaper headline about a botched police raid reading "Cop Shot Cop."
Okay.
So yeah, so that's kind of where this came from. So the band eventually adds Jack Natz to the group on bass, and Todd was not playing bass at that point. He was just singing. But they decided that they weren't the same without his high-end bass, not high-end, quality, high-end sound, playing up on it. And the other thing they said was they realized only popular, this is from Wikipedia, I borrowed this because I went to business. They realized only popular convention required a single bass player in a rock band. So they both decided to eventually play the bass. So they were a double, unlike Iron Maiden, triple guitar attack. They were a double bass, no guitar rock group,
I know.
Josh.
I think that is the most important part of this band, or at least the most notable part. For sure.
That is one thing to know. At this point, Todd and Nats are both playing the bass in this, and Ume rejoins and leaves the group several times, and Jim Coleman was brought in at different times to be on sampler when that happened. So I probably should mention who is in the band at this point. This would be Todd A. This would be Jim Coleman. This would be Jack Natz, and this would be Phil Paleo. So there is no David Ume in this version of the group. Yes. So there you go. Mm-hmm.
Well, I initially, let me say this. I grew to really like this album. I thought this was a really interesting album. It's not going to be for everyone. It's pretty confrontational off the bat, but I feel like if you will know pretty soon within a couple songs, I think if this is an album for you.
Well, I mean, the cover of the album alone confronts you immediately with the visual. Yeah,
adding having the two basses and the various percussion and metal that they use really strikes a different sound on this album, and industrial did immediately come to mind. We always talk about songs being in a factory, or there is like a Stomp-esque quality to some of the percussion on this, but the driving nature of this sound on this album, and kind of the different turns that they take within the album really appealed to me. It's kind of I also noted that it really has kind of like a goth vibe to it at times too, especially on a song like Room 429, which is one of the songs I recommend you check out if you're interested in this album. It's kind of got a spooky feel to it throughout some of the songs.
It's also got weird things like lounge music and stuff is built in too. Yeah.
there's a song on here called $10 Bill, which starts off with the scream and then goes into like really drums and heavy bass, and then they throw in some horn blasts and a whistle, like a whistle and like a coach's whistle that you're gonna blow to call a timeout or something, and it's like a Tom Waits song on crack or something.
That is one of the people I said it.
Yes.
There were times where this reminded me of Tom Waits. Yeah, and
Yeah.
that's something I wrote down for sure.
And you know, I like Tom Waits. I like the albums that we've discussed, and so I really like this as well. It's so kind of off the beaten path at times. They're not afraid to, you think with two basses and just percussion as kind of the primary instruments, like how different could it be? But they seem to do different things throughout this album. They're not afraid to go instrumental at times, like on Israeli Dig. It's almost like this dirge type song that's all instrumental. They have a little short interlude that's instrumental called Migration. And they're not afraid to go kind of like full noise rock too at times with the song like Seattle, which kind of is like just repeating Seattle in a weird way over and over again, that goes back and forth in your headphones. There is violin on this album that I think on a song Cut to the Chase, which I really liked, and it like kind of lent this Middle Eastern vibe to that song, but I found it really appealing. And I don't know, everything throughout is pretty interesting. Everybody Loves You, which I think is the last song. I really kind of got like Iggy Pop vibes off of them from this.
They actually toured. They actually were his opening act.
Oh, okay.
For a while. Yep.
Yeah, there is
take
kind
it
of
full circle.
There's like definitely early Stooges kind of like, or Iggy Pop, you know, how confrontational he was. I feel like that's kind of how they are with their music as well. And yeah, I thought this was a really interesting album, and it drew me in pretty quickly, and but I could totally see how people would be turned off by it, and so I'm very interested to hear what you have to say about it.
Yeah, they had like a pretty big following in New York. They were kind of considered one of the better live bands in New York in the late 70s and the early 90s, late 80s, excuse me, and early 90s. I apologize. This was a really interesting album. This is another one of these I had no concept of what I was going to listen to. I mean, you kind of get an idea when a band names themselves Cop Shoot Cop, and that has a footage of like a little child holding a gun to her hand, looking like in duress and not sure. You're like, all right, I get an idea. You name some things. Yeah, there's definitely an industrial vibe to this that is there. The bleakness of... you know, groups like Nine Inch Nails or Ministry and stuff like that. There's a little bit of that. Then, yeah, there's the Tom Waits piece. There's a noise rock element. Not shoegazy, type noise rock. More art rock noise rock, right? Like avant-garde stuff. There's a little bit of what Suicide did in the 70s.
Yeah, that's good.
Where use of voice, right? The lead singer in particularly, I thought was evocative in the way the Suicide singer was, and much like them, there was that idea of the confrontational live performance. I actually think there's a lot in common with this album and that Suicide album, which I think famously I liked, and the two of you guys did not like a lot at all, but I did like it. But it's got elements of art rock for sure in this, and then there's weird things where like here's a little bit of like lounge and soul, here's a little bit of I guess what they used to call the cowpunk, right? Like that thing that, I'm trying to, what was the name of the cowpunk band? You know, they kind of, the Meat Puppets were called cowpunk to some degree, but
Psychobilly, is that what you're talking
Psychobilly, yeah. There's just it's we normally like to draw comparisons. You're right. The Iggy Pop and stuff. We like to draw comparisons, but this is it's kind of a useless endeavor to do that because they're their own thing. Yeah. I'm with you, Josh. The thing that drew me into this was the eclectic nature of this album. Yeah. I also thought the re-listenability of this album, if you're into interesting music, the thing with it is it's not so. It's a relatively easy listen for challenging music. And so there's not going to be the barrier like there is with some challenging music where it's hard on the ears. Right. This isn't really it's aggressive and challenging, but it's not hard on the ears. And the more you listen to it and kind of know what's coming, the less hard on the ears it
Yep.
gets. And then you can realize like I at first when I listened to this, I did not know it was double bass. Like I realized that there was not a lot of traditional guitar in this, and that was my initial thought. Like there's not a lot of guitar
Yeah.
in this, especially this week because there's another album that's the exact opposite of that. And but then like I read, about because I was curious about the band, and normally I wait till the end to listen to it. But I read, and it's like it's a double bass attack and no guitar. I'm like, oh, that's what it is. It's like
Yeah.
there's no guitar in this album at all, and it's like, well, duh, kind of like, how did you not pick that up the first time around? And yeah, the harshness of the percussion, and the metallic nature of it, it sounds organic, but it also sounds studio cultivated as well. And sometimes within the same song, it bounces between both in that, the bass part may sound recorded in the studio and the drumming or the percussion part of it sounds like it's recorded raw, right? And then it can reverse on the next song where the bass sounds raw and the drums sound a little bit more curated. And lyrically, it's exactly what you'd think. It's basically about like the
Yeah.
dystopian United States.
Yeah.
I would say it walks the line of heavily left-leaning with like an anarchy style view of the world, like maybe nihilistic
Yep.
view of the world, I'd say, but not so much that it doesn't have an opinion. It has an opinion, and its opinion is like left-leaning on the political spectrum, I would say. And the lyrics are designed to challenge you and take on organizations and stuff like that, and kind of get you to question things and equity related issues in particular. There's a lot of references to rent on this, so like it seemed very specific, like
Yeah.
Can't pay the rent. I'm like, that sounds like something that might be going on right here in New York of that era. It might be, but yeah, I like this album quite a bit. And what I always love when we do an album that I have absolute, until
Yeah.
a week ago when I made this album, I would not have even have heard of this band before. I just was like, let's go with the obscure, and this kind of came up in artists that are like underappreciated or underrated in the 90s, and I'm like, oh, let's go ahead with what their highest one was, and we put it in. And the glory of doing that is sometimes you stumble on something like this that you never would have covered, and this was kind of like a real hidden gem. So thumbs up for me.
Yeah, thumbs up for me. I will add that the lead singer's voice is like very gravelly and not screechy per se, but there's kind of like a growl and like a menacing vibe to it. And I think the percussion kind of leading everything and the rhythmic quality to this album is what drew me in, and I think is like kind of what sets it apart from maybe other noise rock or things that are dominated by the guitar. I think that's maybe what turns me off for other noise rock bands at times, and this is not the case. So I think that's kind of the difference with the percussion and the bass too, I think, to a certain extent.
Yeah, gosh, there was a band we covered like either very early in the 80s or late in the 70s that the lead singer was remarkably similar to this, and it is completely blanking. It was during that era in the late 70s and the 80s where we did a lot of sort of challenging rock bands, of different genres, right? So you had like The Wedding Present.
Are you talking about like Public Image Limited? Or
it wasn't Public Image Limited, no, because that one was it was oh gosh, it was a guy. I'll get to it. I'll clean that stack when we're doing another album, because it's going to kind of like slightly drive me insane until I remember what it is.
Yeah.
It was definitely, I think, one of our bonus albums that we covered, and so it'll come to me and I'll bring it up later. But
good stuff.
Yeah, strong thumbs up for me.
Yeah, nice. I wonder what Matt will think of this album.
I mean, he liked the Tom Waits stuff.
Yeah, that's true.
So. And that's probably the thing that this most resembles. If I had to pick one thing, I would say, late 80s Tom Waits is the number one thing, followed by industrial rock, which he likes. So I think he's actually going to like it.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, we'll report back next week.